Hey, what's going on, you guys? Today I'll be taking a look at the Hiexa V-series keyboards. Now, these keyboards are entry level and they are marketed towards beginners and folks who are new to custom keyboards. Now, more specifically, the group buy deal that they have going on right now is even more marketed towards beginners. I'll explain what that means in the video. So, quick disclaimer here, they did sponsor this video by sending me 4 of the units from that group buy so that I can do an unbiased review. Let's jump in. Now, I'm going to start off by talking about the price here as stated in the title of the video. Yes, it is basically $300 before shipping and taxes for 4 custom keyboards unbuilt without switches, which is the cheapest option you can choose for this group buy. Actually, it's more like 3.5 because the numpad doesn't really count as a full board. Then it goes as high as $400 for the same combo, but with the addition of 500 switches to your order. The pricing is dictated by whether you want brushed PVD or mirror PVD finish for the weight, and also if you want those 500 switches or not. And yes, as of right now, you have to buy all 4 keyboards at once, and you do not have the option to only buy one. I'll add more to this in a bit. So the 4 keyboards are a 65% layout, a 75%, a TKL, and a numpad. And when you pick your keyboard configuration, you do get to choose what color for each individual board. Note that the numpad and TKL board will have to be the same color and finish, by the way. As for the TKL, you can also choose whether you want WinKey or WinKeyless. And something to note is that they opted for an F13 layout as well. Looking at the specs, they are mostly identical, with the design differences being the dimensions of the board. Obviously the size layout, but things like the typing angle are all 6.5 degrees across the board, and front height are pretty much the same. As for the stabilizer support, the main boards like the 65, 75, and TKL can only support PCB screw-in stabs, while the numpad supports both plate-mounted clip-in stabs and PCB screw-in stabs. Let's talk about packaging. These are very entry-level custom keyboards, so do not expect anything fancy. They are just brown cardboard boxes, but pretty well packed in general with foam, and you will not get a carry case. Speaking of a carry case, this is actually one point where I think Hiexa would lose to something like the Neo keyboards from QWERTY Keys, because the Neo series are just as cheap in terms of pricing, but it comes with a carry case per unit. That's actually quite huge. Now in the box, you of course get your keyboard, you get the screws and hardware, the rubber case feet in both black and white, the tri-mode PCB which is compatible with QMK and VIA, a USB receiver for the wireless connectivity, a palm plate which apparently is the only plate option you can get, and also a couple optional case foams and a PE foam. As for the mounting styles, you do have silicone dumbbells and socks for PCB and plate gasket mount, as well as screws for top mount. If you choose to purchase the 500 switches, you will get 100 pieces of each color here. Now, each of these switches don't have any names as far as I can see, but they do have the specs on the label, which is something I can appreciate. What's also interesting is they do give you some variety as the switches are from different makers. These purple switches are from Texi, pink are from Bsun, green are from JWK, blue are from KeyGeek, and browns are from Haimu. Okay, so earlier I've just mentioned QWERTY keys. This allows me to dive into the design aspect of the V-series keyboards. So I'm going to be completely honest here, it's basically a clone of the Neo keyboards that came out much earlier last year that I had reviewed. So the Neo 65, Neo 70, and the Neo 80 are all on my channel. More specifically the Neo 80, because the Neo 70 and Neo 65 are unibody cases, meaning they don't contain a top and bottom case. The Hiexa V-series has the quick screwless top case assembly, so you can just pull off to access the internals, which is like the Neo 80. The PCB also uses magnetic connection without messing with any ribbons or JST cables, which would be features on the Neo 70 and Neo 80. Additionally, the ball catching mechanism that holds the top and bottom cases together is also something from the Neo 80 specifically, but Hiexa had applied this design to all of their boards. The PCB also comes in tri-mode, which allows wired connection, Bluetooth, and 2.4G wireless. You can also toggle between those modes via this switch here on the PCB. Now, the numpad is the only exception where it's not utilizing the ball catching mechanism, but instead the top and bottom case are held together by 4 screws. Alright, now I want to dive into the anatomy of the V-series keyboards a bit more. When you open up to the bottom case, there is a clear anti-static sheet that protects the bottom case and your PCB from touching each other. The weight is secured onto it from the inside via screws, and if you remove it, you'll see that the batteries for wireless modes are installed within along with the USB-C daughter board connector. Now, the anodizing quality is consistent for the most part, except I did find a giant scratch across the back of my V75, and this is a huge fail. Now, the thing is, I have been in the keyboard hobby for 4 years now, and I have seen even more reputable brands slip on quality control for a small number of units, which is fine. Just proceed with asking for a replacement, and they should cover it. Overall, the case design and shape is pretty simple, which is no surprise for this level. Nothing really pops or stands out to my eyes personally. The V75 top case has a Hiexa logo cut out on the right side for the 5 RGB LEDs to shine through from the PCB, while the TKL has 4 dots. The sides of the keyboard are tapered so you can get a good grip when picking up. The mirror finishes on my units seem pretty good so far, no complaints here. There is also going to be an official assembly guide on the Hiexa website, so I won't go over it here in the video as it will be redundant. The way you install the PE foam, plate foam, the switches, the plates are all the same in basically every keyboard, so it's pretty universal. Several of my past keyboard reviews cover these steps if you want to check those out on my channel. By the way, I discovered the extensions on the palm plate where it holds the silicone columns for gasket mount are quite prone to breaking off if you're not careful. I was in a rush to finish this video and accidentally broke one off when pulling off my top case, as that motion in itself can be quite sudden, which caused my finger to push in and hitting that extension, which caused it to snap off. Now that was to show you how not to pull off the top case if you have the gasket mount. The way you're supposed to do it is start with the top 2 corners, press and lift, then move to the bottom corners, then press and lift. And if you're using the top mount, you can't lift it the same way since the PCB sandwich is screwed into the top case. Instead, you'll have to use a finger on the USB-C cutout as an anchor point to lift. So going into the sound test here, I'm going to do the V65 with all 3 of the mounting styles using the blue switches, mostly because to color match the case and the V65 also has the least amount of switches for me to install to save time. Which also for the same reason why I'm not going to do 3 typing tests for all 4 keyboards. That is way too long. I'm also going to say that my assumption with these keyboards is they will most likely sound very similar if you were to use the same switches and mounting style configs across each of them for comparison because they have the same design anatomy, being budget entry-level keyboards. I will also add that if there are any noticeable sound differences, it's mainly going to be the size of the keyboard, which would affect the noise reverberation internally. But again, I don't have the time to include 12 different tests in this video, and it would make this way too long. With that said, one board should be enough to get the point across. So I didn't use any foam for the sound test because I felt providing the raw sound of the board itself would be the most honest representation. Case foams and plate foams are mostly going to dampen the pitch of the sound, as that is pretty common keyboard knowledge. The PE foam is going to significantly alter the sound signature into something more marbly, as the community describes it. But the PE foam is also so strong where it basically makes every keyboard sound the same. It's literally got its own sound signature that overrides everything else, so I avoided that. In terms of the 3 mounting styles, I personally did not hear any difference for the sounds. There isn't any ping or unwanted hollowness that I picked up at all, and I will say that's mostly due to the fact that there is hardly any void space internally between the PCB sandwich and the keyboard case itself. All of the mounting methods also have a slight flex in the center, but not much around the edges since those are the spots that are the contact points and where they are being secured. In fact, the flex is so slight, I would say there isn't any at all, especially with no flex cuts on the PCB. To be honest, in terms of sound and feel between the three mounting styles, I personally experienced no difference. So I would say you're really going to hear and feel the difference mainly from the switches and keycap profile you choose. And because of that, I personally would choose the gasket mount over the top mount purely because the top mount requires a little bit more effort to take off the top case. So one last question to wrap up this whole video, and that is, would I buy into this group buy deal? Personally, no, I wouldn't, because at this point, I have been doing custom keyboards for about 4 years now. I know what I like, I know my preferences, so it doesn't make sense for me to spend money on units that I will never use. For example, I'm a TKL user. I don't use 75, I don't use 65, I don't use 60, I don't use the numpad, so this group buy deal doesn't make sense to me. So this is really for people who are just jumping into custom keyboards and trying to figure out what they like. So I will tell you, when I first jumped into custom keyboards, one of the advice that I was given was figure out your layout. Figure out what size preference you like on your keyboard. And the thing is, like, you can't really just go to a group buy meet and try something out. Like, you actually have to take a particular keyboard, put it on your desk, and use it for a decent amount of time to figure out if it makes sense for your workflow, for how you play games, etc., and however you use it. So with this being a group buy deal and having to buy 4 units, it would make sense if you and maybe some other friends were interested in figuring out the whole custom keyboard thing. You guys gather up some money and then you guys all pay for it together. Then yes, this group buy deal would make sense and would be more cost efficient rather than buying a single individual unit, which would end up being a little bit more expensive later on down the line, which Hiexa did say that they will open up to after this whole bulk deal ends. So there's that. Anyways, this is all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.